With us today are representatives from the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada and Clark County Social Services. And before we get started, we're just going to have a few quick housekeeping items. First, I want to let you know that we're going to have this in two parts for our town hall today. The first part will cover the Eviction Moratorium and legal aid, and the second part will cover the CARES Housing Assistance Program. We will then take a few questions at the end of each part of the town hall where you'll be able to participate. And then if you would like to ask more questions, you will need to use the chat box in the Zoom function, and we will address those questions at the end of each session. Again, we thank you for joining us today. And also, following this town hall, we're going to have a Spanish language town hall at 6 o'clock p.m., which will cover the same topics that I've just outlined. And without no further ado, I'll now introduce you to my partner, Commissioner Tick Segerblom.
Thank you so much, Will. I don't have much role here other than to look pretty, I guess. But I did want to say to people, first off, there's no question that's too dumb, so feel free to ask anything. We have experts here who can answer that. Secondly, if you are facing eviction, please do not just ignore it. The number one thing we've learned is that if you hear about eviction, you think you might be evicted, reach out to us and to the governmental entities, the nonprofits here, and ask for help. If you ask for help, we have lots of things we can do. But if we don't know about it, we can't do it. And if you wait till the last second and the constable's at your door, that's when it's really, really tough. So please, the sooner you reach out to us for help, that's fine. And finally, just remember, this is nothing that you have done wrong. A year ago, the government shut down the economy because of COVID. Because of that trickling effect, a lot of you have suffered horrendously. And maybe you can't afford to pay your rent or whatever, but the fact is this is not something that you have to take personal responsibility for. No blame on your part. So please don't feel guilty. This is something the government needs to repay you for what we've done. We want to help you, but we can't help you unless we know that you have a problem. So again, reach out for us. And now I'll turn it over to Councilwoman Olivia Diaz.
Thank you, Commissioner Segerblom. This is so timely, so needed in our communities. With the eviction moratorium about to come due, we are starting to see more and more calls come through the office, and just in conversation with people who do good work with different organizations, that a lot of people are scared. They're starting to get notices. They don't know what to do. They don't have anywhere else that they could potentially move to. And so that's why what Commissioner Segerblom just stated is so important. We need to be armed with information. We need to be diligent. We need to take the first step. And that first step is contacting a local elected that can then help you navigate and steer you in the right direction, whether it be Legal Aid of Southern Nevada or a do-it-yourself self-help center. There's so many tools available, but we do have to follow through, and we do need to know our tenants' rights and every available aid that is out there. And that's why it's so critical today that we have this town hall to also share with you all the social services and aid that is out there that sometimes our community just doesn't know. And so one last thing before I turn the mic back over is we need to be instrumental in helping facilitate this information. We have to be the village helping the village. And just like we've been trying to be helpful to our seniors through this vaccination process and through getting tested for COVID times, we also have to be good stewards of good information and share and let other people know that it's okay not to know, but that we need to seek this information, we need to stay the course, and we need to follow these processes that do protect tenants from being evicted. But like Commissioner Segerblom stated, sometimes it's too late by the time the constable is there in person to, evict someone from their home. And we know that stability is key right now for our children too. It's been hard times for them, not being in school, and then now to have to worry about not having a place of their own to call home is a little disconcerting. So I hope that you'll take notes, that you'll take information down. I'll give you, if you live in the city of Las Vegas, my office number is 702-229-4623, and you can always give us a call and we'll help you as best as we can. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to learning along with you all of this wonderful information.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. And again, we're all here to help. You can also call myself as well as Commissioner Segerblom. You can call our office at 702-455-3239. So we're going to jump right in, and we're going to have a presentation from Jim with the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. Jim, it's all yours.
Sorry about that. He just told me to do that. So let me start again. My name is Jim Birchtold. I'm an attorney with the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. And as you might imagine, the number one call, the number one inquiry we're getting right now is, what do? I think I'm going to be evicted. Evictions are scary, but there is something that you can do about them. As has already been stated, the best thing you can do is take action. You have to try to take control of the situation and do whatever you can do to protect yourself. So let me just kind of take a step back first and tell you how an eviction works. An eviction starts, every eviction starts, by the tenant receiving a notice from the landlord telling the tenant what the landlord believes the tenant has done wrong, right? So this could be, you haven't paid rent. It could be, you violated your lease agreement. It could be a no cause. You stayed after your lease had expired. So some notices are one part, some notices are two part. The only one part notice is a non-payment of rent. That's a 7-day non-payment of rent notice. Every other notice is a two-part notice, meaning you'll receive one part telling you what you did wrong, and then you'll receive the second part. Now, when a tenant receives that notice, the tenant has the opportunity to defend themselves. If it's a 7-day no-cause notice, the tenant has those a 7-day non-payment of rent notice, the tenant has those 7 days to protect themselves. If it's one of the two-part notices, like a lease violation notice, the tenant will receive the first part of the notice, and then the tenant will receive a second part of the notice that's called a 5-day unlawful detainer notice. That is the tenant's opportunity to protect themselves. So during that 5-day period, they can go down to the court and they can file an answer with the court and tell the court why they think they should not be evicted. Same with the 7-day non-payment of rent notice. During that 7-day period, the tenant can go down to the court and file an answer and say, this is why I don't think I should be evicted. Now, there is a self-help center at the Regional Justice Center, which is the courthouse in downtown Las Vegas. That self-help center has all the forms and all of the information that a tenant will need to learn how to fill out an answer form and to learn how to file with the court. There is also an online program available where a tenant doesn't even have to go down to the court to file that answer. All they have to do is get online, pull up the program. It's like a TurboTax. It will lead the tenant through a series of questions, ask them a series of questions that will help populate that answer form and automatically file it with the court. So there is no excuse for a tenant not to take some action, because if the tenant doesn't take any action, what happens is the eviction's granted automatically. So after the tenant's opportunity, that time period for the tenant to file an answer passes, then it's the landlord's chance to file with the court. So the landlord will go down and file with the court and say, I served my tenant a notice, and now I want to evict. Now, if the tenant has filed an answer, what happens is the court sets a hearing. Regardless of what the tenant says in that answer, that tenant is going to get a hearing in front of the judge. However, if the tenant doesn't file an answer, what happens is the eviction's granted automatically. So there is no downside to not filing an answer. You should always file an answer. So you file an answer, you get a notice that you have a hearing in front of the judge, you show up in front of the judge, and you make your arguments about why you shouldn't be evicted. Now, as everybody hopefully knows, right now, the eviction moratorium that has been in place is set to expire March 31st. So April 1, evictions are potentially going to start again. So if you are a tenant what do you need to be thinking about? One, if you have not applied for rental assistance, you have to apply for rental assistance. Kevin Schiller from the county is going to be here later in the hour, and he's going to be talking about the rental assistance program, CHAPS. There is a pot of money there that tenants who have been impacted by COVID can tap into to pay their rent. The application process can be a little cumbersome. And so we have seen a number of tenants who have gotten discouraged and have just quit. That is not the answer. The answer is to stick with it, submit that application, and get that rental assistance. The other thing you have to think about, if you are a tenant who is already in the eviction process, so let's say the landlord had already filed an eviction case against you before the moratorium went into effect, so that case it's called stayed, it's paused right now. Those cases, depending on where your eviction is pending, are going to start back up again. So it's possible that you may already have an eviction order issued against you. It also is possible that your case is somewhere in the process and will be one of the first ones to start back up. So if you are anywhere in the eviction process, you need to go on the court's website. It could be the Las Vegas Justice Court if you live in Las Vegas, North Las Vegas Justice Court if you live in North Las Vegas, or it could be the Henderson Justice Court. But you need to go on the website, you need to look up your case, and you need to see exactly where your case is at. Because in some courts, if the eviction order has already been issued, those orders will just be enforced come April 1st, meaning the order will go to the constable will come out, and the constable will lock you out. In other courts, the Las Vegas Justice Court specifically, the landlord's gonna have to take some action. The landlord's gonna have to file something with the court and tell the court, I was in the process of evicting, but now I wanna go forward. So you need to stay on top of those cases. The other thing I just cannot emphasize enough, you have to take action and file an answer. The worst thing that can happen is the tenant doesn't do anything. About 75% of the eviction cases are granted because the tenant does nothing. And so the eviction's just granted automatically. That's the worst thing that can happen. So take action, protect yourself, apply for rental assistance. And if at any point in this process you have any difficulty, if you have questions, Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada is there to answer your questions. We have a website with a lot of information. You can always call. We have a hotline. The number is 702-386-1070. We have advocates who are staffing the hotline who will answer those calls and walk you through the eviction process. We also run the self-help center down at the Regional Justice Center that has forms and information, and starting April 1st, we'll have people there to assist tenants live if they are having issues. So it is overwhelming. It is overwhelming and it's scary, but there are resources to help you.
Thank you so much, Jim, and I can't reiterate enough that yes, we have to take action, and we have to take that action soon. So if you or anyone else you know may need assistance, don't hesitate to reach out for help, to get that much needed rental assistance that you will need to keep your family housed. And I just have one question. Is there any commonly forgotten paperwork that folks forget to print out when they are, going before the court? I'm hearing about some CDC forms or something like that they will need. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because I know there's been a point of confusion there. I think that would be helpful.
So a lot of tenants have probably heard about the CDC declaration. It's often called, or the CDC form. Starting April 1, that's really not going to be an issue. So the CDC had issued an order on the federal level putting a moratorium on evictions, but the tenant had to take action to get that protection. The tenant had to fill out a CDC declaration and give it to their landlord and say, I've been impacted by COVID, I can't pay my rent, and at that point the landlord was supposed to stop any eviction process. Governor Sisolak issued a Directive 036, which was largely based on that CDC order. And under the governor's directive, you similarly had to fill out a declaration and give it to your landlord to protect yourself. Well, starting April 1st, all of that protection goes away. There is a possibility that something will happen on the federal level and that CDC order will somehow be extended. It's also possible that the governor might do something. We haven't heard, so we just don't know. So right now, the CDC order, you might hear a lot about it, but starting April 1, it's not going to really matter.
Thank you so much for that clarification, Jim. And I believe we had one more question from the audience who was watching. They said, can you provide us an overview of the mediation program?
Sure, and I'm so glad you asked that question because that's another thing that I really wanted to emphasize. If you file an answer, if you receive an eviction notice and you file an answer with the court, you should always elect mediation. All right, so in your answer form, there's a box that you can check that says, do I want to mediate? And you should always say yes. So mediation is a process by which the tenant gets to sit down with the landlord, with a mediator who is a neutral third party, to talk about the landlord's issues and to try to reach some resolution to hopefully keep the tenant in that property. So it's an informal process where it's just the mediator, the landlord, and the tenant, but a lot of good things can come out of mediation. When you are actually in a court hearing, standing in front of a judge, in an eviction hearing, the only thing the judge can really do is say, you're evicted or you're not evicted. But in mediation, anything is possible. Whatever creative solution you and the landlord can come up with, that's what you can agree to avoid that eviction. So it could be a repayment plan. It could be a definitive move-out date. It could be how the deposit is going to be applied. It could be anything that the landlord and tenant can think of, no matter how creative. The more creative, the better. So if the mediation is successful, then the mediator will report that back to the court, and the hearing, the eviction hearing, probably will not go forward. Now, if the mediation is not successful, the parties can't reach some resolution, then the eviction hearing goes forward just as it normally would. So there's no downside to mediation. It gives you the opportunity to potentially resolve the issue and retain the property or figure out some way to walk away from the property in an organized manner that works for you and works for the landlord and hopefully results in some benefit.
So Jim, you're the expert, obviously. So if I have a case number, this is another question. If I have a case number in justice court for mediation, can the landlord still proceed with eviction?
So right now, if you have a case number in justice court for mediation, the landlord is proceeding with mediation, with eviction. So the only way right now that you can get into the mediation program is if the eviction process has already started. So landlord serves a notice, tenant will go down to the court and will file an answer in response to that notice. And in that answer form, the tenant will check the box and elect mediation. That will put the tenant into that mediation program. So the tenant will have the opportunity to go through mediation. If it's successful, the eviction stops. If it's not successful, then the eviction will go forward. So it's all encompassed within the eviction proceedings. But again, there's no downside to it. So if you have the opportunity to elect mediation, elect it.
And just to follow up, so I get served with eviction, I file an answer, and can I file that online?
Yes, you can file the answer online. There's a program that will walk you through the entire thing. You never even have to leave your house. I've heard tenants that do it on their phone. But if you can't, if you're not technologically savvy, you can go down to the courthouse and they have the forms and the information there to allow you to do it in person as well.
And if you file it, is there a time frame that it would take, even if you lost, it would take a couple of weeks or a month or something, you could stay in the house?
Yeah, the eviction process moves fairly quickly. Nevada has one of the faster eviction processes, but it will buy you some time. If nothing else, filing that answer will get you a hearing in front of the judge. So if you file the answer and you elect mediation, a mediation's got to be set. So that will buy you probably a week, maybe 2 weeks, while the mediator gets on board and gets the mediation scheduled. Once the mediation gets set, that has to occur. If the mediation's not successful, the hearing in front of the judge happens. That will probably be another couple of weeks. So right now, in the special session that was held as a result of the pandemic, there was a bill passed that said that the eviction hearings where there's a mediation involved cannot be set more than 30 days out. So again, elect mediation if you have the opportunity.
All right, Jim. Another question coming in says, I received rental assistance, but the landlord refused to take the money. What should I do?
So that's a big issue. And we're seeing it, and we don't really know why we're seeing it, where the tenant goes through the process, gets all the documentation together, submits it to the county, and the landlord simply doesn't want to take the money. So for the county to issue that money, the landlord has to be involved, and the landlord has to sign something and agree to take it. So we don't know of any way to force the landlord to take that money. But you could potentially raise it as a defense in your eviction case. You could say, I went through the process, I was approved for money, I was ready with the county to pay everything that the landlord owed, and the landlord didn't want to take it. Now, what the judge will do with that information, I really can't say. But potentially, it could be a defense that you could use to try to avoid that eviction. Hopefully, the judge in that eviction case would try to persuade the landlord to take that money. I don't know, but it's certainly worth a try.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was a very thorough overview of the evictions process and how our constituents can get the help that they need. Once more, could you just give our constituents the numbers that they can call or the websites that they can call to get help? And then we have another question, but it's leading right into the next presentation by Kevin Schiller.
So to call Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada and the eviction hotline, that is 702-386-1070. The Legal Aid's website is lacsn.org, stands for Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, lacsn.org. If you want to visit the Self-Help Center's website, which is an amazing website, it has all the information you could want about evictions and all the forms. That is civillawselfhelpcenter.org. So all one word, civillawselfhelpcenter.org.
And Jim, we are going to ask this question because the tail end does ask about evictions. So it says, I applied for CHAPS in January, but am awaiting to hear further about it. If I get an eviction notice in April, what will happen?
So if your application is pending, there's really not a lot from the eviction standpoint that you can do about that. You have to proceed just like you would normally. So if you receive a notice and you're waiting on your CHAPS application to be approved, you still have to respond to that notice. The fact that you have applied for rental assistance is not necessarily a defense. Again, it's something you can raise in your answer and bring it to the judge's attention. You can try to work with your landlord, and I would absolutely encourage open communication with your landlord. I would think that most landlords want that money. So I think most landlords, and we have seen that landlords are willing to work with their tenants if they know that their tenants are taking action. So hopefully you can work with your landlord and try to delay that eviction process as much as possible while your application gets approved. But I'll say it one more time. You have to take action in response to that eviction notice. You have to file an answer with the court.
Thank you so much, Jim, and I hope you all have a pen and paper handy or a little notepad. This is all good information, and if you heard something that you heard asked to you, make sure that you get that information out to interested parties. So next we will hear a presentation from Kevin Schiller, who's going to walk us through the rental assistance portion as well as other available resources for families. Kevin?
Hello. Kevin Schiller, I'm Assistant County Manager here at Clark County. I'm going to try to consolidate a little bit of history for everybody so you can hear a little more about both the initial CHAPS assistance program where people had applied for assistance, what occurred with that program, and where we're headed in the coming months and actually in the coming days. So first off, I think the big issue is in the initial CARES funding that we received to set up the CHAP assistance program. That funding came with some fairly minimal requirements around eligibility and actually allowed us to be fairly flexible in terms of how we processed and what we did. Two key pieces tied to that, just so everybody's aware, in that tranche of dollars in terms of the expenditures of those funds. That got launched in July of 2020. We initially had started with nonprofits. The capacity became overwhelming, so then we shifted that into an internal process where we hired hundreds of temp staff, and that process continues in terms of the staffing today. Fast forward, there was two eligibility pieces tied to that. One was you could have a landlord attest. So what that allowed us to do is have landlords attest for hundreds or multiple clients within their own complex in one application. So it gave us that flexibility. And then the AMI, which is the affordable median income, which I'm just going to translate for purposes today of what's your income level related to your family size. There's a requirement there, which was about 120%, which if you translate that over for a family of four, you could make $90,000. And when I talk here in a second about the second round, I'll tell you what that income looks like now. Two pieces tied to that. That allowed us to expedite and actually make more and more individuals eligible. With that, in December of 2020, what happened is obviously we exhausted those funds. That was in conjunction with utility payments and other payments that were all coming out of that same federal initial CARES funding tranche. So with that, what happened was we did not want to, so many of you, I think I saw a couple questions already of individuals asking, hey, what if I applied in January? Where is my application? What's the process? So as we ran out of funds in December, we still had within the application process in the queue about 12,000 clients or households that had applied for rental assistance in our CHAPS program. We made a determination at that point for two things. One, we anticipated an additional federal stimulus with rental assistance, which we did indeed get. That was called the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. Translation is basically it had a carve out for rental assistance. Two key pieces tied to that. That rental assistance and federal dollars change the requirements under the federal treasury guidance. So as I talked about in that family of four, where I talked about there was an annual income of $90,000, that switched down to a $60,000 threshold for a family of four, to give you some context. The other piece that's happening with the new second wave of funding is we no longer can do landlord direct application in bulk for those clients. There has to be a client application in our queue, and they have to attest to meeting those requirements. And then the third piece, which I don't want to spend a lot of time on because it really takes away from the message, but the key issue is they also want it prioritized. When I give you that 80% of AMI number that I just told you, at $60,000 for a family of four, they also want it prioritized 75% of it to 50% of AMI. So what we have done is had to essentially prioritize those two populations. What the piece that I want to make sure is emphasized is I mentioned there was 12,000 applicants in the queue. Since that time, we've received over another 9,000 applications. We left it open, anticipating this funding. What we have done since that time is we have continued to process applications that are in the queue. So of those 12,000, to date, I think we've processed about 4,500 to about a $12 million total outside of our computer system or our IT system, because with that new federal money and those new requirements I went over, we had to completely re-upgrade our system. So that has been completed. Two key pieces I want to get messaging out on is that is likely going to roll out here this coming Monday in terms of our new process. When I say new process, the thing I'm really emphasizing is the new requirements to those applications. So if I give you a total, I would say to you it's about, if I said everybody in the queue sitting here today, somewhere between about 17 and 20,000 applications are sitting in that queue that will go into a fast forward mode. So we anticipate probably processing about 1,700 applications a week in that process. That's a pretty high number. But I would also say to you, and this is the key piece, with those numbers that are sitting outside of, let's just give it 20,000 clients that are sitting in the queue that we're processing, we have funding between the city of Las Vegas, sitting here today, North Las Vegas, Henderson, Clark County funding, and the state of Nevada giving us their rental assistance, about a total of $161 million that will be utilized for rental assistance through our regional model. We have with that money, based on our projected averages, we're going to serve about 40,000 total households. So translation means we have dollars sitting there for about another 20,000 households. So anybody that's watching today or listening, there's two key pieces. I'm sure Jim already talked about this, but make sure you get onto our website, chap.clarkcountynv.com. I can't emphasize enough, I'll say that about 16 times, because I need to get you in the queue. Once you're in the queue, what's going to happen with this rollout, and I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it tonight, but we have to verify that income requirement that I just spoke to. The two key pieces there are, it's going to be what's your income, specific to whether you're employed, unemployed, those key pieces. So think of it kind of like taxes is how I typically reference it, but that's not a good example because it could be you're making cash, you're making money other places. I want you to be able to attest and talk about what your income is so we can get you there. Once that occurs, we have to do two things. We have to get those verification documents, and then we have to get some verification documents from your landlord. One of the key issues that we've seen is a lot of clients are getting their application information in documents in our previous experience, and then the landlords struggle getting that in. So we actually are trying to tackle that to make sure we can do that. One thing that I think is really important with the application, once you get it in and you see the document list, because it's very straightforward when you see this, we need to get that information in, because the minute that application is complete, that is the trigger with the landlord, so we can pay them as long as we have their information. So a lot of times it gets held up in that process, but I want to make sure again that we get people onto the website to get their inquiry in because of those 20,000. And I think there's already been a lot of discussions on moratorium, and I'm assuming questions have come up around that. If you get into April, we want you in the queue. You want to be able to reference that you were in the queue, and you want to be able to reference, and we can actually, when we know you're in the queue, we can verify that for you. So I think that's a key piece. We also are trying to work on several components tied to the application process around expediting those payment components in terms of those landlords with the new rules. So one of the key barriers, as I said, was kind of landlord W-9 verification and some of those pieces. One of the pieces that we need is if you're talking to your landlord and they're compliant, give them the list. Get ahead of the curve. Make sure you go talk to them and say, I'm applying for rental assistance. As I think Legal Aid said, most landlords are going to want to get paid in terms of those arrears. So we want to encourage you to make sure you do that. A couple other questions that have come up, and I just want to finish with that is, again, with that 20,000 those 20,000 applications that are not there yet that we can fund, this is the time to make sure that's getting in, because the minute it rolls out, we anticipate a flood, and we anticipate another flood if, for example, the moratorium is lifted. So I want to make sure everybody kind of hears that today and how important that is in terms of our process. People have asked a lot of questions about payments and other pieces, so I'll get to that in a second, but I want to make sure I answer questions too. So.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Did you have any questions, Councilwoman, that you heard? Or okay, so this is another question about CHAPS. It says, I applied for CHAPS a couple of months ago, and I'm having difficulty reaching someone to get a status update. Who should I contact? And I'm sure this is a question that you get often, Kevin, and you know we really know that you get through a lot of those requests, so I'm sure you have an answer for them.
So
Give me your cell number, would you?
Answered this twice already today, so just it's all good. So let me give you my first bit of advice. The first piece is, if you applied 2 months ago, Remember, any application we've processed since we closed it with the new federal money has to have the new verification documents. So when you go onto the website where you applied, I don't know when you applied exactly, I want to make sure you look at that website to see if the documents that are now required you have provided. That's the key to have a complete application. If you applied 2 months ago, you're probably getting fairly close in the processing queue based on what I know in terms of the numbers. But what I would say to you, the first piece is make sure it's complete. If you can make sure it's complete, that's going to be the key. And then I'm assuming we have places people can email or contact us. If you get me your name information to me, I can find out where you're sitting in the queue, so you have that information. But even if I find out where you're sitting, the documentation is going to be the critical component.
So everyone listening, you heard that. Make sure that if your name is in the queue and you've already filled out the application, be sure to type your name and your number in the chat, and someone will reach out to you. And again, if you are looking to apply for the CHAP rental assistance, that address is chap.clarkcountynv.gov. That is, again, chap.clarkcountynv.gov.
.com. I apologize, Commissioner. .com.
.com, excuse me. .com, everyone.
Yes.
All right, so Kevin, it's back to you.
Okay, so I'm just looking here. So the question is, will the application be enough to avoid eviction? Again, I think probably legal aid can chime in on this too. The application, you should be referencing to your landlord that the application is in, so that they know that you're in that processing queue. Will it help with mediation? I think the key piece on us, and I was on a call with legal aid literally an hour ago, the idea is linking mediation to the eviction to the rental assistance. So there's a lot of work happening in that regard in terms of how we're doing outreach in those pieces. So I can't say that it absolutely will avoid eviction, but I think most want to get paid, and I think the key issue is verification with us that you are in the queue and documents are there. I don't know if you want to add anything on the legal aid side, or Councilwoman.
So will it technically, legally avoid the eviction? No. But hopefully it will. So I think Kevin said is exactly right. Every step along the way, it could potentially help you. Before the eviction's even filed, it could potentially help you negotiate with your landlord. If your landlord knows that you have an application pending, perhaps your landlord will not even initiate the eviction process. In mediation, could it help you? Yes, you're sitting down with the landlord. Hopefully you can negotiate something knowing that that application is pending. Will it help you in front of the judge? Potentially. You could certainly tell the judge that your application is pending. What the judge will do with that, I'm not 100% sure, but there's no downside to letting them know. But again, even if your application is pending, you still have to file with an answer with the court if you get that eviction notice.
Absolutely.
If I can follow up, so is there a time period between when the application is approved and the landlord is actually paid?
Say that again.
Is there a time period between when the application, the CHAPS application is approved, but the landlord actually gets the money?
Yes, there is, and there's no, essentially, that's one of the pieces we're working through right now is that expedited payment. So in the court process, we're actually trying to interface right now about immediate payments. In the current process, when we approve that, we typically are communicating with the landlord, with their vendor, to ACH and deposit that in a matter of days. So we usually have 2 check runs within a week. The longest period of time on the application process is the documentation collection and not necessarily the payment piece. And we also try to do it ACH because we have had mail difficulties, so I want to make sure people understand that based on the volume. Next question, I don't know if you want, are you reading the questions, Councilwoman?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Because we're shifting from, I know that in the past, especially when we started the process of helping people with rental assistance, there were nonprofit providers that would interface with different folks who didn't have the ability to navigate the technology and uploading the documents on their own. So I was wondering now, since the nonprofits aren't part of the process, if someone needs this technical assistance, isn't figuring out how to upload things on their own, who do they turn to for assistance?
Perfect question, Councilwoman. So we are actually doing two things. We were with the nonprofits, but the capacity was too much. So the other issue that we've done, and we're actually in the process right now of setting up contracts that will be basically, and I'll use my terminology, wrapping around those clients to help them with the download and education around what they need and how to get it in. So we're going to really kind of shift the nonprofit side really to support of the application, not necessarily adjudicating the application and payment of the application. So it fits within our process. On that note, I want to make sure I cover, because I think it's related, Councilwoman. The question that I just saw was, they asked how many months of rent will CHAPS cover, and the second piece was security deposits. So the first one on the CHAPS coverage, we're covering arrears and in the current month. So if we got the application today and we were approving that, or let's say we got the application today and we were approving next month and everything was in, we will pay for everything into that month. So if I got it today and we approved it in April, we're going to pay through April. Security deposits. So the other piece that we're working pretty hard on is affordability. So back to the nonprofits, the other piece that we're focused on is we have a whole program that already exists in the county, which is rapid rehousing. That rapid rehousing program does have components tied to security deposits. One of the key issues that we're trying to do with the rapid rehousing is link that into our mediation and our evictions and where we can share information. So if you actually get your rent paid, I'm going to give two scenarios, and you still can't afford the apartment moving forward because of your income and no fault of your own, we're going to rehouse you and try to rehouse you in an affordable unit that fits with you within that process. If the answer to the question is you can still maintain in it, then you would maintain there. But the nonprofits are going to be, they already operate that program for us, so we're ramping that up. And with the third stimulus, which I'll call it CARES 3.0, the American Rescue Act, we're going to actually utilize dollars from that to infuse the security deposits and the rapid rehousing. And then obviously I think there might be a question that already came to legal aid before I got here. But the other piece that I think is important is if you end up being evicted and you're in our rehousing program, the key tenet there is you have an eviction on your record and people will not want to take you in terms of a tenant. So that's the other piece where the county comes in terms of trying to guarantee payments and work through those deposits so that we can get you rehoused and you're not sitting there alone, because we're going to have mass evictions and people with history. And so we want to make sure we work through that. And legal aid can talk to some degree about ceiling and those types of pieces, but either way, we don't want you to go from apartment A and eviction into a shelter and then into an apartment. We want to rehouse you as quickly as possible. So we're actually working on sharing information to do that right now.
So I have another question that came up. So let's just say I'm a tenant. I'm now going through the judicial process. I've said that I'm going to go through mediation. I've already been approved by the county for CHAP, but hadn't had an opportunity to have that landlord receive payment yet. In that time period, even though we're going through mediation, number one, can we be evicted still? But also, a question for you, Kevin, is do we provide a letter of intent to pay for the tenant?
We provide a letter of approval, and we're actually usually dialoguing with either the property manager and or the owner, just so you guys are clear in terms of that verification. They also get some notification that they're in the queue, but that approval does come in the form of an email so that they have that. And then the landlord we directly communicate with. If they were in mediation and there was a payment, that's the other issue that's pending. We would make sure, and that's one of the pieces we do, is communicating with mediation so they have that information. I don't know if you want to add anything to that on the legal aid side, but...
No, that's absolutely right. So one of the great things about mediation is the mediator has a link to Clark County. Clark County Social Services has actually made somebody available so that the mediator can reach out to that person to see whether your application is pending, to see whether your application is going to be approved. So if you are in that mediation process, again, that's part of the eviction process. So as long as you're in mediation, you're not going to get evicted, because the eviction only goes forward if that mediation fails. If the mediation fails, then you'll get a hearing in front of the judge at which you could potentially be evicted. But until that happens, no. The object until then is to try to figure out a way to keep you in that property and get the landlord paid.
And I want to echo two things I forgot to make sure I mentioned in the eligibility that makes it very simple. If you're receiving any benefits, TANF, SNAP, state welfare, or unemployment and DETR benefits, that's almost an automatic qualification under the AMI under CHAPS. So we want to make sure you know that in terms of documentation, and we're working on a link with the state right now so we can do it automatically. The other piece on the payment, so he spoke to it a little bit in the mediation process. The other piece we're actually trying to do also in the payment side of things as things escalate into the mediation program is we're actually working on kind of a timely payment process that can be expedited for those that are facing lockout or eviction. So I think that's the other piece that I think is really important to note. Let's see. Question here. How many months will it cover? I think I hit that one, the security deposits. If you received rental assistance last year, there's no disallowance on applying under the new funding. So if you're still in arrears or you're facing arrears, we want to make sure you apply. And remember, that goes across utilities, and it also goes across your rental assistance. The one thing that I didn't mention previously is that the federal funding that we're currently going to roll out this coming week will not cover mortgage assistance, so it's only rental assistance. The third round of funding we don't know yet, so just so everybody's aware of that. But it will cover all rental assistance, and you can apply again. So you should apply in the queue if that's your question.
Kevin, I think you stated something very significant. So if you can just state again, you said if you receive TANF, SNAP, state welfare, or what was the fourth one?
Unemployment benefits.
Or unemployment benefits, you automatically meet the requirements to receive CHAP. Okay.
I have a quick question. I don't know if you addressed it already, but it stated from the audience that they applied in December of 2020, but was told to reapply, and they're confused if they reapply using the same.
So if you were told to reapply, you're in the queue. I'll get your information to make sure you're in the queue, but really that reapplication is a reapplication with the documentation. So to clarify that, so you don't lose your place in line, so to speak, in terms of when your application came in. I also was going to mention there'll be a notification that goes out if you are in the queue when we reopen, and that notification comes out for what's required. You'll have 45 days to get that in to maintain your spot in line. But for your question specifically in the audience, if you applied in December and you got that reapplication notice or had some notice, give me your information, but you should be in the queue specific to that, and it's about the documentation and the supporting information.
I guess to be more clear, how do they resubmit that, or do they have to reach out, or do they just
it's all online.
All online.
On the client side, it's all online.
And just to clarify, mediation, you don't have to pay for your side of the mediation, right? That's all paid for by Clark County.
That's correct, Commissioner. Yes. Yeah, there's no charge to the tenant for that.
Kevin, I think there's also questions about how retroactive this rental assistance is. If it's the first time they're applying or trying to get rental assistance and they haven't been able to pay their rent for many, many months, is there a limit? I think that's the question on some people.
The arrears is the arrears. So our whole intent here in the arrears is to get people current. So I think there's two key questions. We get them cleared into the current month. The second question is the affordability side of that. So the other piece that I just want to make sure is out there, since you're getting questions on that, is if they continue to be in arrears, we want to make sure if we can get them into the housing queue for rapid rehousing that we do that, because that process takes time. We do it in emergencies and we manage it in crisis, but if that's the case, and it doesn't look like your status has changed, hopefully our economy starts to rebuild and we see people getting back to work. But if that's the case, we want you to ask early, and I want to make sure that that's clear in terms of getting you into the queue so that we can rehouse you, so you're not continuing chasing.
Another thing is, I think the county has a program for assistance for utilities. Is that?
Commissioner, yes. So just to be clear, when you put in your application, and I guess I should re-reference that, you can update your application. Let's assume you went in and you updated the document and you hadn't indicated that you needed utility assistance. You can indicate that in this application round or in your updating of your application. So utility assistance is a part of that process. And just so everybody's aware, whether it's the City of Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, Henderson, or Clark County Unincorporated, and with the state dollars, those are all eligible, so you're aware.
And Kevin, just so everyone's clear, I know that to get that utility assistance, there are some steps, just like in the eviction process, that they have to make sure that they do. Can you give them some helpful information about what, if there's any front end advising they need to be in communication with the companies, letting them know that there been some impacts to their household due to COVID, things need to be noted in their accounts. Can you speak to what people should be doing to be proactive so their processes go smooth?
So 2 key pieces, I'm going to really simplify it down. 1, you've been impacted by COVID or your income's impacted. You want to make sure you clarify that. If you have your statement of your utilities, obviously that's going to be critical. We'll directly communicate to verify the arrears. I will say with the utility companies, we have quick verification processes, but the main issue is going to be around, if you're in there on, and I'm going to use this example, on the rental assistance, you're going to be way over documented compared to the utility assistance, but we will be able to document that. So 2 key pieces is what's your employment impact, period, is the most simplified way of saying that, and then what your statement of arrears is. The difference between this and the last round is we did mass payments across the valley to cover utility assistance in that process, and in this round, we are actually doing it on the client basis. But they are, and then I will say this, on the 3rd round of stimulus, there is also going to be inclusion, if I understand correctly, on rental assistance and the utility assistance. So we're awaiting, the short and long of that is we're waiting for the Treasury guidance specific to that, but that'll probably happen in another town hall where we talk about when that comes. But I can't imagine that it will be more cumbersome than what we're currently doing in this round. So hopefully it's easier, and it makes it easier on all of you out there because we want to make it easier for you to get the money in your landlord's hands.
Follow up, Councilwoman? Okay. Commish? Well, we are coming to the conclusion of our town hall.
Well, I apologize. If we're at the conclusion, I did want to make a couple of points. So you can't ever ask a politician to want to say anything. But the governor just announced that, first off, starting April 7th, anyone over 16 will be eligible for vaccination. So that's great. He was also asked about extending the moratorium, and I think he made a diplomatic answer which said, I'm looking at it. So we can all hope that happens. That'll give us more time to get this money out there and reprocess it, because there is a lot of money. The Biden administration and Congress gave us a ton of money, and we want to make sure no one is evicted who should have their rent paid.
And I guess my closing comments would just be to try to get the information to the communities that may have a harder time navigating processes that need some hand-holding. And so just knowing the nonprofit orgs that will be helping and partnering in this work to make sure that no one is left behind in this effort. And sometimes the people who need it the most are the ones that get left further and further behind. So as soon as we have that information, if we can just make sure that we all share it widely and far, so that there's no excuse for not getting the assistance. In today's world, we should all be doing our part to help each other, get through these rough times.
All right, so I just want to thank everyone. Specifically, I want to really thank Kevin Schiller from the County Assistant Manager's Office, as well as Jim from Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada for joining us this evening. Commissioner Segerblom, as well as Councilwoman Olivia Diaz and myself to join our constituents in getting this information out. We do know that COVID in this past year has been incredibly difficult for all of us, but one thing that we can say is that if we stick together and we continue to share information and help our neighbors, we'll get through this stronger than ever. So in the meantime, continue to practice your social distancing, wear your mask when possible, and do whatever you can do to help mitigate the spread. And don't forget to get vaccinated. So with that being said, thank you and good night, everyone.